Your husband's shadow won't carry you here, Lieutenant. The words cut through the morning air at Base Echo's training yard like a blade through silk. 43 people stood watching, cadets in formation, instructors with clipboards, maintenance crew pausing mid-task. Lieutenant Helena Ward held a single sheet of paper in her right hand, a medical exemption request for physical training. Her left hand hung loose at her side, fingers relaxed but not limp. She didn't respond to Colonel Adrian Cole's declaration. She simply stood there, 5'7" in standard fatigues, dark hair pulled into regulation bun, face neutral as concrete. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that his breath fogged the space between them. He was taller by half a foot, broader by 40 pounds of muscle earned through 2 decades of combat deployments. His uniform bore the insignia of someone who'd climbed the ladder fast. Too fast, some whispered, though never loud enough for him to hear. He reached down and plucked the paper from Helena's hand. She let him take it. No resistance. No protest. He held it up for the crowd to see, then opened his fingers. The paper floated down to the sand like a wounded bird. Physical issues, he read from memory, his voice dripping with theatrical sympathy. Health complications from traumatic stress. He turned to face the assembled troops. You know what we called that in my day? We called it being soft. A few nervous laughs rippled through the younger cadets. The older ones, the ones who'd seen actual combat, kept their faces blank. Sergeant Major Earl Dawson stood near the equipment shed, arms crossed over a chest decorated with 28 years of service ribbons. He didn't laugh. His eyes were fixed on Helena's stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight distributed evenly, breathing steady and controlled. Something about the way she held herself made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Adrian wasn't finished. He circled Helena like a shark sensing blood in the water. Your husband was a good man, a great SEAL. But you're not him, are you? You're just the woman he left behind. He stopped directly in front of her, his face inches from hers. And this is not a place for people who hide behind paperwork. Helena's eyes never left his. She took one breath, 4 seconds in through the nose, held it for 4 seconds, released it for 4 seconds through barely parted lips. The rhythm was precise, mechanical, like counting steps in a minefield. Adrian noticed the breathing pattern and mistook it for fear. That's when he struck. The elbow came fast, a short, brutal jab aimed at her solar plexus but redirected at the last microsecond to her jaw. The crack of bone on bone echoed across the yard. Helena's head snapped to the right. Her knees buckled. She hit the sand hard, landing on her left shoulder, dust rising around her like smoke from an explosion. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then came the whispers, urgent and scandalized. Did he just... Oh my word. Someone needs to... But nobody stepped forward. Not yet. Adrian stood over Helena's fallen form, hands on his hips, chest heaving slightly. Not from exertion, from satisfaction. Get up, he said quietly, or stay down and prove me right. Helena pushed herself to a sitting position. Sand clung to her left cheek where blood seeped from a split along her jawbone. She touched it once with 2 fingers, examined the red smear, then wiped it on her pant leg. No wincing, no tears. She planted her right hand flat in the sand, then her left, pushed up to her knees, then to her feet. The movement was fluid, efficient, not the scrambling recovery of someone stunned by violence. It looked rehearsed, practiced. Earl Dawson's eyes narrowed. He'd seen that kind of rising before, in raids where operators took fire and kept moving because stopping meant dying. Helena stood at attention. Her jaw was already starting to swell, a dark bloom spreading beneath the skin. A single drop of blood traced a line down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar. Around her neck hung a pendant on a thin chain, not the usual religious medallion or sentimental locket. This was cylindrical, brushed steel, about the size of a lipstick tube. It caught the light wrong, like it was made of something denser than decorative metal. Earl filed that detail away. Adrian looked disappointed that she'd stood. Nothing to say? No, sir, Helena replied. Her voice was steady, no tremor, no anger, flat as a frozen lake. Then get off my training field. She turned and walked toward the barracks, not fast, not slow. Each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted to let her through. Most wouldn't meet her eyes. A few of the women looked furious on her behalf, but none spoke up. Adrian watched her go, arms crossed, expression smug. When she disappeared around the corner of the admin building, he clapped his hands twice. "Show's over. Formation in 5. We've got a course to run." The cadets scattered. Earl remained where he was, staring at the spot where Helena had stood back up. Something nagged at him, a detail his subconscious had flagged but his conscious mind hadn't processed yet. He walked over to the patch of sand where she'd fallen. There, pressed into the ground, was the outline of her left shoulder. But the way the sand displaced, it wasn't the chaotic spray of someone thrown off balance. The impact pattern was controlled, almost like she'd rolled with the fall to distribute force, like someone trained to take hits and keep functioning. Earl looked toward this admin building. Helena was gone, but he made a mental note to watch her more closely. Widows didn't move like that. Victims didn't breathe like that. And that pendant. He'd seen similar devices before, in places where communications needed to be encrypted and carried close. He shook his head and headed back to the shed. Probably nothing. Probably just a woman trying to hold it together after losing her husband. Probably. But Earl hadn't survived 28 years by ignoring his instincts. Inside the barracks bathroom, Helena stood at the sink with the door locked. She ran cold water over a clean cloth and pressed it against her jaw, watching her reflection with clinical detachment. The swelling would peak in about 4 hours. The bruise would turn spectacular colors over the next week. She'd had worse. She opened her mouth, tested the range of motion. No broken teeth, no fracture, just soft tissue damage. Acceptable. She pulled her phone from her pocket, not her personal device, a second one she kept in an inner pocket sealed with Velcro that didn't show up on metal detectors. Typed a short message. Contact made. Escalation confirmed. Standing by. Sent it to a number with no name attached. The message disappeared 3 seconds after sending, leaving no trace in the phone's memory. Helena set the phone down and leaned against the sink, closed her eyes, let herself take 5 breaths that weren't counted, weren't controlled. 5 breaths to be the widow everyone thought she was. Then she opened her eyes, splashed water on her face, and became the operative again. If this story makes you angry, hit that like button, because justice is coming, and it's colder than you think. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when silence becomes a weapon. The next 24 hours passed in slow-burning tension. Helena kept to herself, eating alone in the mess hall at odd hours when the crowd was thin. She attended the mandatory counseling sessions she was supposedly there to lead, listening to young soldiers talk about stress and fear and the weight of carrying weapons. She nodded in the right places, asked gentle questions, took notes. Professional, competent, harmless. But around the base, in the spaces between official duties, the whispers grew louder. Adrian made sure of it. He stopped by tables in the mess hall, leaned in close to groups of soldiers, voice just loud enough to carry. Heard she's claiming PTSD from her husband's death, wants special treatment. At the gym, he commented loudly while spotting a lieutenant on bench press. Some people joined to serve, others joined to collect a check and play victim. In the motor pool, while inspecting vehicles. Ward, she'll be gone in a week. Can't handle real military life. The campaign was surgical. He never mentioned the punch, never acknowledged the violence. Instead, he painted Helena as fragile, opportunistic, undeserving. And it worked. By the end of day 2, most of the base had formed an opinion. The younger troops, the ones who worshipped Adrian's combat record, dismissed her entirely. The mid-level officers stayed neutral, unwilling to cross a colonel over someone they barely knew. Only a handful, Earl, a couple of female instructors, one grizzled warrant officer, watched and said nothing, their silence heavy with doubt. Helena felt the isolation like a physical thing, a bubble of empty space that moved with her through corridors and across the parade ground. She didn't fight it, didn't try to win hearts or correct rumors. She simply continued her routine. Wake at 5, physical therapy exercises in her room, breakfast at 6:30, counseling sessions until lunch, paperwork in the afternoon, dinner at 7, lights out by 10. The only deviation was the way she paused sometimes, standing near windows or in doorways, her eyes tracking movement across the base with the focus of someone mapping terrain. Earl noticed. On the 3rd morning, he positioned himself near the mess hall entrance, pretending to read a maintenance report while Helena collected her breakfast tray. She moved through the line efficiently. Oatmeal, black coffee, 1 banana. No wasted motion. When she reached for the coffee pot, her grip wrapped around the handle with her thumb positioned over the top, fingers curled underneath. It was the hold of someone trained to control a weapon's recoil, applied unconsciously to a coffee pot. Earl followed her at a distance as she carried her tray to a corner table, watched the way she sat with her back to the wall, facing the entrance. Saw how her eyes scanned the room in a pattern, left to right, near to far, exits first. He'd done the same thing for 3 decades. It was operator behavior, threat assessment. You didn't learn that in counseling school. He approached her table. "Mind if I sit, Lieutenant?" Helena looked up, assessed him in one glance. "Sergeant Major, please." Earl set his tray down and lowered himself into the chair with the careful movements of a man whose knees remembered every parachute landing. They ate in silence for a minute. Then he spoke, voice low enough that nearby tables couldn't hear. "That's quite a bruise." "Yes." "You file a report?" "No." "Why not?" Helena took a sip of coffee, set the cup down precisely in the same spot it had been before. "Because it wouldn't change anything, and because I have my reasons." Earl studied her face. The bruise had ripened into deep purple and yellow, a violent sunset across her jaw. She wore it without makeup, without shame, like it was just another part of her uniform. "Your husband," he said carefully. "He was SEAL Team 6, wasn't he?" Something flickered in Helena's eyes. Not pain, calculation. "Yes." "Lost him 2 years ago. Afghanistan." "Yes." "That must have been hard." It was. Earl nodded slowly. He was fishing, trying to gauge whether grief or something else lived behind that controlled facade. "I knew some 6 guys back in the day. Good men, toughest training in the world." He paused. "You ever spend time around the teams? Learn any of their habits?" Helena met his gaze directly. "I learned that strong people don't need to prove it, and that silence is often the smartest strategy." It wasn't an answer, but it was a message. Earl heard it loud and clear. "Back off, old man. You're getting too close." He finished his eggs, drained his coffee, and stood. "Well, Lieutenant, if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who doesn't repeat things, you know where to find me." "Thank you, Sergeant Major." As he walked away, Earl felt the weight of her gaze on his back. He'd been right. This woman was not what she appeared to be. The question was, what was she actually doing here? That afternoon, Adrian made his next move. He called Helena into his office, a converted storage room in the admin building with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the obstacle course. She arrived exactly on time, knocked twice, waited for permission to enter. Adrian didn't look up from his paperwork for a full 30 seconds, a power play so obvious it would have been funny if the stakes weren't what they were. "Sit," he finally said. Helena sat, hands folded in her lap, posture straight but not rigid. Adrian leaned back in his chair, making it creak. "I've been reviewing your file, Ward. Impressive credentials. Master's in psychology, certification in trauma counseling, 2 years with the VA." He closed the folder. "But here's the thing, this isn't the VA, this is an active military base, and I need people who can keep up, physically and mentally." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" He tapped the folder. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've been here 3 days and you're already causing problems. Rumors, distractions. My soldiers are supposed to be focused on training, not gossiping about some counselor who can't handle the environment." Helena said nothing. Adrian waited, hoping she'd defend herself, give him something to latch on to. When she didn't, he shifted tactics. "I'm going to make this simple. Tomorrow morning, 0600, you're going to run the obstacle course with the cadets. Full gear. If you complete it within standard time, you stay. If you don't, you request immediate transfer to a desk job somewhere safe and quiet." He smiled, thin and cold. "I think that's fair, don't you?" It wasn't fair. It was a trap. The obstacle course was brutal. Rope climbs, wall vaults, mud pits, cargo nets. Most new arrivals took weeks to build up the endurance and technique to finish within regulation time. Adrian was banking on Helena failing publicly, giving him grounds to remove her without triggering an official complaint. And if she refused to attempt it, that would be just as good. Either way, she'd be gone. Helena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, sir. 0600. I'll be there." Adrian's smile widened. "Outstanding. Dismissed." She stood, saluted, left. Adrian watched her go, satisfaction blooming warm in his chest. By this time tomorrow, the widow problem would be solved. He pulled out his phone and sent a group text to 5 of his most loyal officers. Ward running obstacle course tomorrow 0600. Spread the word. Should be entertaining. By dinner, the entire base knew. The mess hall buzzed with speculation. Some felt bad for Helena, convinced she was being set up to fail. Others thought it was about time someone made her prove she belonged. A few, mostly the ones who'd seen combat, wondered why she'd agreed so easily. Running a course you weren't prepared for was suicide for your reputation, unless you had a reason to believe you'd succeed. Earl heard about it from a junior instructor who could barely contain his excitement. $50 says she doesn't make it past the rope climb, the kid said, grinning. Earl didn't take the bet. Instead, he made sure his schedule was clear for tomorrow morning. He had a feeling this was going to be more interesting than anyone expected. That night, Helena sat on her bunk with the door locked and the blinds closed. She'd removed the steel pendant from around her neck and opened it with a twist that revealed a USB port, plugged it into her secure phone, typed, "Escalation to physical test, proceeding as planned. Recommend surveillance on equipment shed, 0500, 0600 tomorrow." Sent it. Waited. The reply came back in under a minute. Roger. Eyes on. Stay sharp. She disconnected the device, sealed it, hung it back around her neck. Then she lay down fully clothed on top of the covers and closed her eyes. Sleep came easily. It always did before a mission. At 4:55 the next morning, the equipment shed was dark and silent. At 4:57, the side door opened. A figure slipped inside, moving with confidence in the blackness. No flashlight, just hands that knew exactly where everything was stored. The figure located the gear bag labeled Ward H and unzipped it. Inside was standard issue climbing equipment, harness, carabiners, rope, gloves. The figure selected the 2 carabiners attached to the harness and examined them by feel. Found the locking mechanism, loosened it 3/4 of a turn. Not enough to be obvious on visual inspection, but enough that under body weight and stress, the lock would fail. The figure zipped the bag, exited the shed, disappeared into pre-dawn darkness. 90 seconds, start to finish. No witnesses. No cameras in that corner of the base. Perfect. Except for the micro camera mounted inside a ventilation grate, installed 2 nights ago by someone who knew exactly what to look for. The camera watched, recorded, transmitted the footage in real time to a server located 300 miles away, where Commander Noah Pierce watched on his tablet from a hotel room, drinking bad coffee and taking notes. "Got you," Noah murmured. He zoomed in on the figure's hands as they worked the carabiner, captured a clear frame showing the deliberate sabotage. Then he picked up his phone and sent a message. Evidence secured. Proceed. At Base Echo, Helena's phone buzzed silently under her pillow. She checked it, read the message, deleted it, stood and dressed in her PT uniform, laced her boots with the methodical care of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, checked her watch. 5:30. Time to move. The obstacle course at 0600 was not the quiet morning training session Adrian had advertised. Word had spread like wildfire. By the time Helena arrived, over 70 people had gathered around the perimeter. Cadets, instructors, support staff, even a few officers from other units who'd heard the rumors and wanted to see the spectacle. Adrian stood near the starting line, arms crossed, looking pleased with the turnout. He'd positioned this as entertainment, and the crowd had delivered. Helena approached alone. No supporters, no allies. She wore standard PT gear, her hair braided tight, the bruise on her jaw now a faded green-yellow that looked worse in the harsh morning light. She stopped in front of Adrian and stood at attention. "Ready, Lieutenant?" His voice carried, projecting to the crowd. "Yes, sir." "Good." He gestured to the course. "Regulation time is 12 minutes. You've got 15 because I'm feeling generous. After the rope climb, you'll hit the wall vault, then the mud crawl, then the cargo net. Finish line is at the far end. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Then let's see what you've got." He raised his hand, paused for dramatic effect, then dropped it. "Go." Helena moved. Not sprinting, not rushing. She approached the first obstacle, a series of low hurdles at a controlled jog. Cleared them with economical movements, no wasted energy. The crowd watched, waiting for her to falter. She didn't. She reached the rope climb, the first major test, a 30-foot vertical rope hanging from a steel frame, swaying slightly in the breeze. Earl stood near the back of the crowd, eyes locked on Helena's gear bag sitting open near the start line. He'd watched her collect it from the shed, watched her do a quick visual check of the equipment, but you couldn't see a loosened carabiner lock just by looking. You'd only know when it failed. Helena pulled on her climbing harness, attached the carabiners with practiced efficiency. The crowd murmured. Someone near the front said, "She actually knows how to use that stuff." Adrian frowned slightly. Helena gripped the rope, placed her boots against it, and began to climb. Hand over hand, smooth and rhythmic. 10 feet, 20 feet. The rope swayed with her weight. She was halfway up when the first carabiner lock slipped. The metallic click was almost inaudible under the morning wind, but Helena felt it, a sudden looseness in the safety line that shouldn't be there. Her training kicked in faster than thought. Without hesitation, she released the primary rope with her left hand and grabbed the secondary safety line that ran parallel, a backup most climbers ignored. Her right hand maintained grip on the main rope as her body weight shifted. The crowd gasped. It looked like she was about to fall. Earl's heart slammed against his ribs. "Grab the secondary," he shouted, but she'd already done it. Helena's fingers wrapped around the backup line with the precision of someone who'd trained for exactly this scenario. She hung suspended for 2 seconds, legs swinging, then pulled herself up using the secondary line alone. Raw upper body strength, no panic, no hesitation. She reached the top of the frame, touched the bell that marked completion, and descended using the backup line exclusively, ignoring the sabotaged equipment entirely. When her boots hit the ground, the crowd was silent, stunned. That wasn't luck. That was skill, muscle memory, the kind of recovery you only performed if you drilled it hundreds of times until it became reflex. Adrian's face had gone pale. How did you? Helena unclipped the harness and let it fall to the ground. The loosened carabiner was now visible, hanging wrong, lock clearly compromised. She didn't point it out, didn't need to. Earl was already walking toward it, his expression dark as a thunderstorm. He picked up the harness, examined the equipment, then looked at Adrian with something cold and dangerous in his eyes. "This carabiner's been tampered with," Earl said loudly. "Lock's been loosened. She should have fallen." The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Adrian stepped forward, hands raised. "Now hold on. That's a serious claim." "It's a serious fact," Earl snapped. "Someone sabotaged this gear, and since Lieutenant Ward is the only person scheduled to use it, I'd say someone wanted her to get hurt." He turned to face the crowd. "Who had access to the equipment shed between midnight and 0500? Nobody answered. Adrian's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "This is ridiculous. Gear malfunctions happen. It doesn't mean—" "I check every piece of equipment in that shed personally," Earl interrupted. "I checked these carabiners 2 days ago. They were fine." He looked at Helena. "You do a pre-climb inspection, Lieutenant?" Helena nodded. "Visual only. The compromise wasn't obvious." "But you knew to grab the secondary line." "Yes. That's not standard training. That's advanced rescue technique." Helena said nothing. Just stood there. Blood from her earlier injuries starting to seep again from the exertion. Breathing controlled. Face unreadable. The crowd watched her like she'd just performed a magic trick they couldn't figure out. Adrian looked between her and Earl, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. "Everyone back to morning duties," Adrian barked. "Show's over. Ward, my office. Now." "Respectfully, sir, I'd like to complete the course," Helena said quietly. Adrian stared at her. "You're not serious." "You gave me 15 minutes. I've used 6. She picked up a pair of work gloves from the gear bag. "I'd like to finish." The crowd held its breath. This was insane. She'd just survived sabotage and she wanted to keep going. Adrian's options were limited. If he stopped her now, it would look like he was afraid of what she might prove. If he let her continue and she completed the course, he'd have to acknowledge she belonged here. Either way, he was cornered. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Finish." Helena walked to the wall vault. 12 feet of vertical timber, no handholds. She backed up 10 paces, then ran. Hit the wall at speed, planted her left foot halfway up, pushed off, grabbed the top edge with both hands, and hauled herself over in one smooth motion. Dropped to the other side, rolled to absorb impact, came up running. The crowd started to wake up, a few scattered claps breaking out. She hit the mud crawl. 50 feet of barbed wire stretched over ankle-deep mud. Dropped to her belly and moved like a snake, elbows and knees driving her forward, head down, no hesitation. Emerged at the far end, covered in dirt, face streaked brown, and went straight to the cargo net. Climbed it like she'd been doing it her whole life. Over the top, down the other side, Sprint to the finish line. She crossed it with 4 minutes to spare. The crowd exploded, cheering, whistling, cadets pumping fists in the air. Even some of the ones who'd doubted her couldn't help but react to the sheer determination on display. Earl was grinning, a rare sight. Adrian looked like he'd swallowed a live grenade. Helena walked back to the start line, breathing hard but steady, stopped in front of Adrian. 12 minutes, sir, within regulation. Adrian couldn't speak. His face was red, veins standing out on his neck. Finally, he managed. Get cleaned up. Report to my office in 1 hour. Yes, sir. As Helena walked toward the barracks, Earl fell into step beside her, kept his voice low. That was one heck of a performance, Lieutenant. Thank you, Sergeant Major. You mind telling me where you learned to climb like that? Helena glanced at him, saw the question behind the question, decided to give him a slice of truth. My husband taught me, said it might save my life someday. Smart man. He was. They reached the barracks door. Earl stopped. Listen, I don't know what's going on here, but that gear didn't loosen itself. And you handled that rope failure like you've trained for it. He paused. If someone's trying to hurt you, you need to report it, officially. Helena met his eyes. I appreciate the concern, Sergeant Major, but I'm exactly where I need to be. She went inside. Earl stood on the steps, staring at the closed door, feeling like he'd just glimpsed the edge of something massive lurking beneath still water. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to an old friend in CID. Need you to run a background check. Lieutenant Helena Ward. Everything you can find. Call me. The response came back in 30 seconds. Already on it. You'll want to sit down for this one. Do you think she'll survive this setup? Drop your guess in the comments. And if you're rooting for her, smash that subscribe button. Helena stood in the barracks shower, letting scalding water wash mud and blood down the drain. Her jaw throbbed where Adrian's elbow had connected days ago, a steady pulse that kept time with her heartbeat. She pressed her thumb against the swelling, testing the pain threshold. Still tender, but functional. Everything was functional. That's what mattered. She dried off, dressed in a clean uniform, and checked her secure phone. One message waited. Package delivered. Asset in position. Green light for Phase 2. She deleted it, tucked the phone away, and headed to Adrian's office. The corridors were quieter than usual, people averting their eyes as she passed. News of the sabotaged equipment had spread like smoke through ventilation shafts. Nobody knew what to make of her anymore. The widow who wouldn't break, the counselor who climbed like a specialist, the woman who walked through Adrian's traps like they were inconveniences instead of threats. Adrian's door was open. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, face carved from stone. Helena knocked once, entered when he gestured, stood at attention. Neither spoke for 10 seconds. He was trying to intimidate her with silence. It didn't work. That was quite a show this morning, Adrian finally said. His voice was controlled, but barely. You want to explain how you knew to grab that secondary line? Training, sir. What kind of training? The thorough kind. Adrian's jaw clenched. You're playing games, Ward. I don't appreciate games. I'm not playing anything, sir. You set a standard. I met it. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back, walked around the desk until he was 3 feet from her, close enough to loom, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. Let me be crystal clear. I don't care what skills you think you have. I don't care who your husband was. You don't belong here. This base runs on discipline and strength, not sympathy for people who can't handle the reality of military life. Helena's expression didn't change. Is there anything else, sir? Adrian wanted to hit her again. She could see it in the micro-tension around his eyes, the way his right hand curled into a fist, then released. But they weren't alone on a training field now. They were in his office, where assault would be harder to excuse. He settled for leaning closer, voice dropping to a whisper meant to cut. I know why you're really here. You think if you tough it out, prove yourself, it'll bring him back somehow, fill the hole he left. But it won't. He's gone, and you're just embarrassing his memory by pretending to be something you're not. It was designed to wound, to find the emotional pressure point and press until something broke. Helena looked at him with eyes like frozen lakes and said, Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. You didn't know my husband. You don't know me, and you have no idea what I'm capable of. She paused, just long enough for the words to settle. Is that all, sir? Adrian's face flushed dark red. Get out. Helena saluted, turned, left. Behind her, she heard something hit the wall, a coffee mug probably, shattering into ceramic shrapnel. She kept walking, face neutral, while inside a cold satisfaction bloomed. He was rattled, making mistakes. That's exactly what she needed. The next escalation came that evening. Helena was in her quarters, reviewing counseling notes, when her personal phone buzzed. Not the secure one, her regular device. A text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You'll want to see this." She opened her laptop, navigated to her inbox. The subject line read, "Seal widow can't handle reality." The email contained a link. She clicked it, already knowing what she'd find. The link opened to an internal base message board, the kind soldiers use to share news, jokes, and gossip. Someone had posted a photo of her from this morning's obstacle course, mid-fall on the rope climb, face contorted, body twisted. The angle made it look like she was flailing, panicking. The caption read, "Lieutenant Ward, proving she doesn't belong. Took her husband's name but not his courage. How long before she quits?" Below the post, comments piled up. Some defended her, most didn't. "She's taking up space someone useful could fill. Embarrassing. My grandmother climbs better than that. Why is she even here?" The thread had 63 replies in 4 hours. It was going viral within the base ecosystem. Helena took a screenshot, saved it to a folder, and closed the laptop. This was Adrian's work, or someone acting on his behalf. Coordinated character assassination to complement the physical intimidation. She'd expected it, planned for it. But seeing the cruelty laid out in text form, the casual dehumanization, still triggered something cold and sharp in her chest. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too useful to her enemies. This was the ice that came before a storm. She picked up her secure phone, typed, "Digital attack initiated. Preserve all evidence. Recommend monitoring board activity for additional actors." Sent it. The response came quickly. "Already archived. We have IPs. 2 officers, 3 enlisted. Cole's fingerprints all over this." Helena set the phone down and lay back on her bunk, stared at the ceiling. Let herself remember just for 60 seconds what it felt like to be someone's wife instead of someone's weapon. To wake up next to warmth instead of mission parameters. To plan vacations instead of operations. The grief was real. The love had been real. But underneath both, colder and harder, was the fury that came from knowing how her husband had died. Not in combat, not with honor, but abandoned by the man who now sat in a comfortable office 300 yards away, wearing medals he didn't deserve. 60 seconds passed. Helena closed that door, locked it, and became the operative again. The next morning, she found her locker in the women's changing room had been vandalized. Someone had scratched the word "fraud" across the front. Inside, her spare PT uniform had been shredded, cut into ribbons with something sharp. Her running shoes were missing. In their place sat a pair of children's sneakers, pink with cartoon characters. The message was clear. "You're a joke, a child pretending to be a soldier." Helena examined the damage without expression, pulled out her phone, photographed everything from multiple angles, sent the images to the secure server. Then she changed into her remaining uniform, laced up her boots, and headed to breakfast. She'd run in boots before. Wouldn't be the first time. At the mess hall, the whispers followed her like contrails. People stared openly now, no pretense of subtlety. She collected her tray, oatmeal, coffee, orange, and scanned for a seat. Every table was full except one in the far corner. She headed toward it. As she passed a group of junior officers, one of them stuck his foot out. She saw it coming, adjusted her path by 6 inches, kept walking. The officer's buddies laughed at his failed attempt. She sat alone, ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Across the room, Adrian held court at a table surrounded by his loyal cadre. He glanced her way once, smirked, then returned to whatever story he was telling. His audience laughed on cue, too loud, performing for his approval. Helena noted each face, memorizing details. Every person who participated in this campaign was digging their own hole. She was just holding the shovel. Earl entered the mess hall, spotted Helena, and headed straight for her table. Sat down without asking. "Morning, Lieutenant." "Sergeant Major." He set his tray down, then leaned in close. "I heard about your locker, and I saw that garbage on the message board." His voice was low, urgent. "This has gone too far. You need to file an official complaint, IG investigation, the whole deal. What they're doing is harassment, plain and simple." Helena sipped her coffee. "I appreciate your concern. That's not an answer." She looked at him directly. "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" "Because, from where I'm sitting, You're getting crucified and you're just taking it. Earl's frustration was evident, the kind that came from watching injustice unfold and feeling powerless to stop it. You've got rights, protections, use them. Some battles aren't fought in boardrooms, Sergeant Major. Then where are they fought? Helena didn't answer, just held his gaze until he looked away, shaking his head. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. I haven't figured out which. Maybe both. Earl almost smiled. Your husband taught you to climb. What else did he teach you? That patience is a weapon, and that the best traps are the ones your enemy builds for themselves. Before Earl could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices, the scrape of chairs. Helena and Earl turned to see Adrian approaching, flanked by 2 MPs. The mess hall went quiet, everyone sensing drama. Adrian stopped at Helena's table, looked down at her with theatrical disappointment. Lieutenant Ward, these officers need to speak with you. Helena stood. Regarding what, sir? One of the MPs, a corporal with a clipboard, stepped forward. Ma'am, we've received a complaint that you've been accessing restricted areas without authorization. Specifically, the equipment shed between 0300 and 0400 yesterday morning. We need you to come with us for questioning. The mess hall exploded with whispers. Helena felt dozens of eyes boring into her back. This was a new angle, accuse her of the very crime someone else had committed, gaslight her into looking guilty. She could deny it, cause a scene, make herself look desperate, or she could play along and see where this led. Of course, she said calmly, lead the way. The MPs escorted her out. Adrian watched her go, satisfaction glowing warm in his chest. By lunch, everyone would believe she'd been caught red-handed. By dinner, her credibility would be ashes, and without credibility, she was nothing. Earl sat frozen at the table, jaw clenched so hard his molars ached. Something was deeply wrong. The timing was too convenient, the accusation too neat. He pulled out his phone and called his CID contact. I need an update on that background check. Now. The voice on the other end was grave. Earl, you're not going to believe this. Helena Ward isn't just a counselor, she's what? A pause. Classified. But I can tell you this much. She's got security clearance 3 levels above Cole's, and there's a notation in her file that says any interference with her activities should be reported immediately to a Commander Noah Pierce. Ring any bells? Earl's blood ran cold. Pierce, he's CID, Counterintelligence Division. Correct. And he arrived at the base last night, checked into the visiting officer's quarters under a fake requisition. Earl, whatever's happening here, it's bigger than a harassment case. Way bigger. Earl hung up and stared at the table where Helena had been sitting. The coffee in her mug was still steaming. He thought about the way she moved, the way she breathed, the pendant around her neck. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he should have seen days ago. Helena Ward wasn't a victim. She was bait, and Adrian had just swallowed the hook. In the MP station, Helena sat in a windowless interview room, hands folded on the metal table. The 2 MPs stood outside, conferring in low voices. She knew they had nothing, no evidence, no footage, no witnesses, because she hadn't been anywhere near that shed. But someone had, and that someone had been recorded by equipment the MPs didn't know existed. She just had to wait for the right moment. The door opened. Commander Noah Pierce entered, dressed in standard officer uniform with no distinguishing marks. He dismissed the MPs with a gesture, closed the door, and sat across from Helena. For 10 seconds, they just looked at each other. Then Noah's mouth quirked into a tired smile. You look terrible. You should see the other guy. I have. He looks smug. Won't last. Noah opened a folder, spread photographs across the table. We've got him on equipment tampering, harassment, destruction of personal property, and about 6 separate violations of conduct unbecoming. The IP trace on that message board post leads directly to his office computer. And this morning's false accusation? He tapped one photo. That's witness intimidation. We've got enough to bury him. Helena looked at the evidence dispassionately. What about the mission report, the original one, from Afghanistan? Noah's expression darkened. We accessed the sealed files. Your husband's helmet cam footage matches what you've been carrying. Cole ordered the withdrawal 15 minutes before the ambush. Left your husband and 4 others to hold a position he knew was compromised. Then he falsified the after-action report, claimed tactical necessity, got a Bronze Star for leadership under fire. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Helena's hands remained perfectly still on the table, but something behind her eyes shifted, hardened. How soon can you move? There's one problem, Noah said. We need him to act one more time. Something public, something undeniable. Right now, a good lawyer could argue the equipment tampering was negligence, the online harassment was junior officers acting independently. We need him to personally cross a line that can't be excused. He will. He's escalating. How do you know? Helena touched the pendant at her throat. Because men like him can't help themselves. You back them into a corner, they don't surrender. They lash out. Noah studied her. Are you sure you want to finish this? We could pull you now, build the case with what we have. No. The word was absolute. He needs to face every name he left behind, including mine. Noah nodded slowly. Then we wait. But Helena, he waited until she met his eyes. The moment he makes physical contact again, we move. I won't risk you getting seriously hurt. Understood. And if things go sideways, you abort. That's an order. Yes, sir. Noah gathered the photos, returned them to the folder. For what it's worth, your husband would be proud. What you're doing, it takes a special kind of courage. Helena's expression didn't change, but something in her voice softened. He'd tell me I was being reckless and stubborn. Then he'd help me plan it better. Sounds like a good man. The best. Noah left. The MPs returned, told Helena the accusation had been dropped due to lack of evidence, and released her with insincere apologies. She walked back across the base in midday sun, aware of every stare, every whispered comment. The rumor mill had already churned the story into a dozen variations. Some said she'd been caught and released on a technicality. Others claimed she had connections protecting her. The truth, that she'd been cleared because she was innocent, was the least popular version. Justice just walked onto that field. If this hit you in the chest, hit that share button and subscribe, because her story isn't over. That afternoon, Adrian called an unscheduled assembly in the main training yard, mandatory attendance for all personnel. Over 200 soldiers gathered in formation, confused and wary. Adrian stood on a raised platform, microphone in hand, looking every inch the commander. Helena stood in the back row, expressionless. I want to address something, Adrian began, voice booming across the yard. There's been a lot of talk lately, rumors, distractions. And it ends today. He paused for effect. Lieutenant Ward came to this base under the guise of serving as a counselor. But her actions, the complaints she's generated, the disruptions to training, the questionable behavior, these things don't reflect the standards we uphold. Helena felt 200 pairs of eyes shift toward her, stayed perfectly still. Therefore, effective immediately, Lieutenant Ward will be reassigned to administrative duties pending a full review of her conduct. She will no longer participate in physical training, will not interact with cadets, and will confine her activities to her office. Adrian's smile was thin and victorious. This decision is final. It was a power play dressed as policy. No due process, no appeal, just Adrian using his rank to isolate her completely, strip away any remaining credibility. The crowd murmured, some approving, some uneasy. Earl's face was thunderous. He started to step forward, but Helena caught his eye and shook her head once. Don't. Adrian continued, warming to his audience. I know some of you feel I'm being harsh, but leadership means making tough calls. It means protecting the integrity of this base from people who don't belong. Colonel Cole, the voice cut through Adrian's speech like a blade through silk. Commander Noah Pierce stepped out from behind the admin building, flanked by 4 CID agents. He walked across the yard with measured steps, each one echoing in the sudden silence. Adrian's face went pale. Commander Pierce, this is unexpected. I'm sure it is. Noah stopped at the base of the platform. Colonel, I'm going to need you to step down. We have some things to discuss. This is highly irregular. I'm in the middle of... Step down, sir, now. Something in Noah's tone made refusal impossible. Adrian descended, confusion giving way to the first flickers of fear. What's this about? Noah turned to address the assembled troops. I apologize for the interruption. What you're about to witness is the result of a 3-month counterintelligence operation. I need everyone to remain in formation. Do not leave. Do not interfere. He looked at Adrian. Colonel Adrian Cole, you are hereby placed under arrest for dereliction of duty, falsifying official reports, destruction of government property, assault on a federal operative, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The yard exploded. Shouts, gasps, soldiers breaking formation despite orders. Adrian staggered back. That's insane. I don't know what lies Ward has been feeding you, but Lieutenant Ward is not just a counselor, Colonel. She's the founder of Dragon Widow, a counterintelligence unit that investigates suspected betrayal within special operations. She's been operating under deep cover for 90 days. Noah nodded to one of the agents, who pulled out a tablet. And everything you've done, every threat, every act of sabotage, every harassment has been documented. Adrian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He looked at Helena, who had moved to the front of the crowd. Their eyes met across 20 feet of dirt. She reached up and pulled down the collar of her uniform, revealing the top of her left shoulder. There, in black ink, 2 large serpents coiled around each other, their bodies intertwined in an ancient symbol of vengeance and justice. The crowd gasped. The tattoo was unmistakable, not military standard, not decorative. It was a mark of unit designation, the kind operators wore to identify each other in classified contexts. Earl stepped forward, recognition dawning on his face. He'd seen similar marks on SEAL team members, on Delta operators, on people who lived in shadows and hunted monsters. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen displayed an alert. Security breach detected. Dragon Widow operative identified at Base Echo. Immediate stand-down required. The message had been sent the moment Helena's tattoo came into view, triggered by facial recognition software monitoring the base. It was proof, incontrovertible, digital, time-stamped. Adrian looked from the phone to Helena and for the first time saw her for what she really was. Not a victim, not a widow playing dress-up, a hunter who'd been circling him for months, waiting for him to provide enough rope to hang himself. "You," he whispered. "This whole time." "Yes." Helena's voice was calm, but underneath it ran a current of frozen steel. 3 months ago, I requested this assignment. Came to your base under false pretenses. Let you think I was weak, broken, easy to intimidate. She took 3 steps forward. Every insult, every threat, every time you tried to break me, you were building my case. I didn't need to hunt you, Colonel. I just needed you to be yourself. Noah held up the tablet. We have footage of you tampering with climbing equipment, IP logs linking you to harassment campaigns, testimony from 12 witnesses about assault and intimidation, and, he swiped to a new screen. We have this. He turned the tablet toward the crowd. On screen, helmet camera footage, grainy and jerking, a firefight in desert terrain, radio chatter, then a voice, clear and commanding. Viper 1, withdraw now, that's an order. The camera panned right, showing 5 soldiers pinned down by enemy fire. One of them, Helena's husband, looked directly at the lens, shook his head. Sir, we can hold. We need air support. The radio cut out. The camera showed a figure retreating toward an extraction point, leaving the 5 behind. 30 seconds later, the screen went white with explosion. The yard was silent as a grave. Every person present understood what they'd just witnessed. Adrian's face had gone gray, sweat beading on his forehead. His knees buckled. He dropped to the ground, hands sinking into the sand. You weren't supposed to know, he said, voice barely audible. The files were sealed. It was classified. You weren't supposed to. But I did know. Helena crouched down to his level, voice soft and lethal. My husband's helmet cam had a backup battery, kept recording for 47 seconds after primary power failed. Those 47 seconds showed everything. Where you went, what you said, who you left to die. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the steel pendant, opened it to reveal the USB drive inside. I've been carrying his last moments around my neck for 2 years, waiting for the right time, the right leverage. She stood, looked down at him. You wanted me gone because I reminded you of what you did, but I stayed, not to forgive, not to heal. I stayed to make sure you face every name you left behind. Adrian's hands covered his face. His shoulders shook. The CID agents moved in, pulled him to his feet, secured his hands behind his back. Noah read him his formal rights, words droning, mechanical and official. But Helena barely heard it. Her focus was on the crowd, the faces showing shock, betrayal, vindication, shame. Earl approached her slowly, hands raised like he was dealing with something wild and dangerous. Lieutenant, Helena, why didn't you tell me? Because if I had, you would have tried to protect me, and I needed Cole to believe I was vulnerable, needed him to attack. She looked at the old sergeant major, saw the war between respect and anger in his eyes. I'm sorry I used you, but I couldn't risk the mission. The mission. Earl shook his head. How many people have you done this to? How many times have you played the victim to catch a predator? 5 operations. This was number 6. And each time you let them hurt you. Each time I let them reveal themselves. Earl studied her face, the fading bruise, the split lip, the exhaustion carved into every feature. That's one heck of a price to pay. Cheaper than letting them go free. Earl nodded slowly. Your husband. He knew what you'd become. He helped train me, taught me how to take a hit, how to climb, how to survive. He always said, her voice caught just for a second. He said the best operators aren't the strongest. They're the ones willing to bleed longer than their enemies can watch. Before Earl could respond, Noah called out, Lieutenant Ward, we need your statement for the record, and medical needs to check you over. Helena nodded, but before she could move, something unexpected happened. One of the female cadets stepped forward, came to attention, and saluted. Then another, then 5 more. Within 30 seconds, half the women in the formation were saluting her, not because regulations demanded it, but because they'd witnessed something that mattered. A woman who'd endured hell, stayed silent, and emerged holding the evidence that would burn her tormentor down. Helena returned the salute, throat tight. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't planned for the moment when silence transformed into solidarity. She held the salute for a 3 count, then dropped it and walked toward Noah's vehicle. As the CID agents loaded Adrian into an armored transport, he looked back at Helena one last time. I could have ended you. 1 word, and you'd have been gone. Helena paused, turned. You did end me, just not the way you thought. You ended the woman who believed the system would protect her. You ended the widow who trusted that good men always win. What's standing here now? She gestured to herself. This is what you created, and I'll spend the rest of my career hunting down every person like you. The transport doors closed. Adrian disappeared behind tinted windows. The vehicle drove away, leaving dust hanging in the air like ghosts. The aftermath moved with bureaucratic efficiency. Within 2 hours, the base was locked down, all personnel interviewed, statements recorded. By evening, the story had spread beyond Base Echo. Text messages, phone calls, encrypted emails traveling through military networks. Cole's arrest, Ward's cover, Dragon Widow revealed. The news hit like a cluster bomb, fragmenting into 1,000 smaller explosions as people processed what it meant. In the temporary CID headquarters, Noah debriefed Helena in a room with white walls and fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out. She sat across from him, medical report in hand, bruised jaw, minor lacerations, muscle strain, nothing permanent, everything calculated. The trial will take 4 to 6 months, Noah said, reviewing his notes. But with the helmet footage and the documented pattern of behavior, conviction is almost certain. You did good work, Helena. Clean operation. What about the others? The officers who participated in the harassment? 6 facing disciplinary action. 2 will likely be discharged. The rest get mandatory retraining and permanent marks on their records. Noah looked up. Is that enough for you? Helena considered. It has to be. The system isn't perfect, but it's what we have. What about you? Medical leave, reassignment, whatever you need. I want my next assignment. Noah raised an eyebrow. You're serious? After this? Especially after this. There are 12 other names on the list. 12 suspected cases of officers who abandoned teams, falsified reports, played politics with soldiers' lives. She leaned forward. Cole was number 6. I have 6 more to go. Helena, you can't keep doing this. The toll it takes is mine to pay. Sir, with respect, I know what I signed up for. My husband and 4 others died because someone decided his career mattered more than their lives. I won't stop until every person who made that same choice answers for it. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll send you the briefing on number 7, but you're taking 2 weeks leave first. Non-negotiable. Understood. As Helena left the headquarters, Earl was waiting outside, leaning against a concrete barrier. The sun was setting, painting the base in shades of amber and shadow. He straightened when he saw her. Thought you might want some company for the walk back, he said. I appreciate that, Sergeant Major. They walked in silence for a minute. Then Earl spoke. I've been in this life 30 years, seen things that would break most people. But what you did, that's a different kind of strength, the kind that scares me a little. Why does it scare you? Because it costs something I can't measure. Every time you let someone hurt you, every time you swallow your pride and play weak, something inside has to break to allow that. I worry you'll run out of pieces to break. Helena thought about that. My husband used to say the same thing. He'd patch me up after training, tell me there were other ways to fight, safer ways. What did you tell him? That safe doesn't catch monsters, and someone has to be willing to walk into the dark. Earl nodded slowly. He'd be proud and worried, same as me. They reached Helena's quarters. She paused at the door, turned to face him. Thank you, Sergeant Major, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for being the one person who questioned the narrative. Just doing my job. No, you did more than that. You reminded me that there are still good people worth protecting. She extended her hand. Earl shook it, his grip firm and steady. If you ever need a reference for Dragon Widow recruitment, Earl laughed, a rough sound like gravel shifting. I'm too old for field work, but I'll keep my eyes open. Send you candidates. I'd like that. Helena went inside, closed the door, and stood in the darkness of her room for a full minute. Let the mission end. Let the operator mask slip away. Let herself be, just for 60 seconds, a woman who missed her husband and wondered if the price of justice was too high. Then she turned on the lights, opened her laptop, and began writing her after-action report. By morning, it would be filed. By next week, she'd have a new name, a new cover, a new monster to hunt. The cycle would continue until all 12 names were crossed off, or until she broke trying. 3 days later, Helena stood in the base chapel, not for religious reasons, but because it was the only place quiet enough to think. Early morning light filtered through simple windows, casting geometric patterns on the floor. She held her husband's dog tags in one hand, the steel pendant in the other. It's done, she said quietly to the empty room, to the memory of the man who taught her how to climb, how to fight, how to survive. Cole will face charges. The others who helped him will face consequences. Your name is cleared. Your sacrifice is recognized. The tags swung gently on their chain, catching light. She closed her fingers around them, metal warming against her palm. I know you'd tell me to stop, to let it go, to find some other way to live. She smiled sadly. But you also knew I wouldn't listen. You married a stubborn woman, remember? You said it was your favorite quality, right before it became your biggest frustration. A door opened behind her. Noah entered, respectful and quiet. Ready? Almost. Helena tucked the dog tags inside her shirt, close to her heart, clipped the pendant back around her neck. What's the next assignment? Fort Bragg. Major suspected of abandoning a hostage rescue team in Yemen. 6 soldiers captured, 2 killed. He's been nominated for promotion. Helena turned from the altar, face settling into the calm, controlled expression of someone preparing for battle. When do I leave? 72 hours. I'll be ready. They walked out together into morning sun. Across the yard, base life continued. Formations, training, the machinery of military order grinding forward. But something had shifted. In the mess hall, conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. In the gym, female soldiers trained harder, inspired by proof that resilience could defeat power. In offices, commanders reviewed policies about harassment, about reporting, about accountability. One operation wouldn't fix everything. One arrest wouldn't cure the disease of corruption. But it was a crack in the armor, a message sent, a promise kept. As Helena packed her belongings that afternoon, Earl stopped by one last time, handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Open it. Inside was a coin, not challenge issue, but something older. Worn edges, faded inscriptions. Earl's unit coin from his first deployment decades ago. For luck, he said, and to remind you that not everyone in this life is a monster. Some of us are just trying to do right. Helena held the coin, felt its weight. I'll keep it safe. And I'll keep an eye out for operators with broken carabiners and stories that don't add up. If I find any, I'll send them your way. I'd appreciate that, Sergeant Major. After he left, Helena sat on her empty bunk and added the coin to her collection of totems. Dog tags, pendant, now this. Pieces of the people who'd believed in her, trusted her, helped her become the weapon she needed to be. Her phone buzzed. A message from Noah. Briefing materials attached. Subject profile, suspected timeline, cover identity, review and confirm by 1800. She opened the files, began reading. Major Richard Vance, 15-year career, decorated for valor, suspected of leaving 6 soldiers behind to save political relationships with a foreign government. The photos showed a man in his 40s, confident smile, uniform crisp. He looked nothing like Cole. But Helena knew that didn't matter. Monsters wore all kinds of faces. She read until sunset, memorizing details, building the profile. Then she closed the files and wrote a single message. Confirmed. I'm ready. But before she sent it, she pulled out a journal from her bag, a leather-bound book she'd kept since her husband's death. Flipped to a page near the back where she'd written 12 names. Found number 6, Adrian Cole. Drew a single line through it. 11 names remained. She looked at the list for a long moment, then wrote beneath Cole's crossed-out name, "Justice isn't loud, it's patient, and it never forgets." Closed the journal, sent the message, began preparing for the next hunt. She stood and walked to the window, watching the base transition into evening. A group of female cadets jogged past, their formation tight and synchronized. One of them glanced up at her window, saw her silhouette, and straightened her posture mid-stride. Helena recognized her, one of the women who'd saluted 3 days ago. The gesture was small, barely noticeable, but it carried weight. Proof that what she did mattered beyond courtrooms and case files. That every operation sent ripples through the ranks, changing how people saw strength, how they understood courage. She touched the pendant at her throat one last time, then turned from the window. Outside, the base hummed with evening routines. Soldiers heading to dinner, instructors finishing paperwork, the steady rhythm of military life. Somewhere in a federal holding cell, Adrian Cole sat alone with his crimes. Somewhere in Yemen, families grieved soldiers who'd been abandoned. Somewhere on Fort Bragg, a major slept soundly, believing he'd gotten away with his choices. But Helena Ward, founder of Dragon Widow, widow turned weapon, the woman who'd learned to turn silence into a trap, was coming. And patience, as she'd proven, was the deadliest weapon of all.
Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVB Story for more.